Harinder Singh was the kind of man everyone trusted. A gentle 73-year-old grocer who spent 3 decades serving his Surrey neighborhood with quiet kindness. But when a single letter arrived from immigration authorities, the truth about his past began to unravel, revealing that the man everyone loved might not be who he claimed to be. Behind his calm smile lay the dark secret of a fugitive named Hari Lal, wanted for murder in India more than 30 years ago. What followed was a shocking journey from peaceful community life to an international investigation that would expose one of Canada's most astonishing hidden identities. For more than 3 decades, Harinder Singh lived an unremarkable yet content life in Surrey, British Columbia. His days followed a simple rhythm: opening his small grocery store at dawn, greeting familiar customers, and returning home at sunset to a quiet dinner and evening prayers. Neighbors described him as dependable, always ready with a smile or a bag of fresh produce for those in need. Children waved to him from the sidewalk, and elderly locals often stopped by for tea and conversation. To everyone around him, Harinder was a good man who had built a peaceful life through honesty and hard work. His store, Singh's Market, was a cornerstone of the neighborhood. The smell of fresh spices, lentils, and ripe mangoes filled the air inside. He kept an old radio behind the counter that played Punjabi songs from his youth. Regular customers sometimes saw him staring out the window, lost in thought, especially during the quiet afternoons. But no one asked about his past. Most assumed he had moved to Canada, like many others, seeking better opportunities after difficult times in India. Harinder's home was modest, a small 2-bedroom house filled with framed photographs of community events, friends, and distant relatives. The walls told a story of belonging and stability. Every Sunday, he visited the local Gurdwara, bowing his head humbly and donating food to the Langar kitchen. He seemed to have no family nearby, yet no one ever found that unusual. He blended so naturally into the fabric of the community that no one imagined his life could be anything but ordinary. Behind that calm and gentle exterior, however, Harinder carried the weight of something far darker, a past buried so deeply that even he began to believe it might never resurface. But time has a way of uncovering secrets, no matter how carefully hidden. One cold winter morning, Harinder Singh found an official-looking envelope in his mailbox, marked with the emblem of the Canadian Border Services Agency. At first, he thought it might be a routine notice or perhaps an update about his permanent residency renewal. He placed it on the kitchen table and continued with his morning tea, unaware that inside lay a message that would dismantle the life he had built over 33 years. When he finally opened it, the neat black letters on the white paper made his hands tremble. The notice stated that his citizenship and immigration history were under review due to irregularities discovered during a national record audit. His heart sank as he read that his original immigration documents might have been falsified. The letter explained that Canadian authorities had cross-checked his file with newly digitized global databases. A fingerprint analysis from an old refugee record matched one belonging to a wanted suspect from India. The information was vague, but it was enough to ignite panic. For Harinder, the paper felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of all the years he had tried to forget. Over the next few days, his calm demeanor vanished. He stopped opening the store on time and barely spoke to his customers. His neighbors noticed he looked pale and distracted, often standing by his window late at night. He reread the letter countless times, searching for errors, convincing himself it was a bureaucratic mix-up. But deep down, he knew this was the moment he had always feared. For decades, he had managed to stay hidden behind a new name and a new life. Now, it seemed that the truth he had buried thousands of miles away was clawing its way back to him, piece by piece. In 1989, the city of Amritsar was shaken by one of its most brutal and puzzling crimes. A wealthy landowner named Baldev Kapoor was found dead in his farmhouse, his safe emptied of cash and gold jewelry. The police discovered signs of a struggle: broken furniture, bloodstains, and footprints leading toward the fields behind the house. Witnesses reported seeing a man fleeing the scene on a motorbike late that night. His name, according to the initial investigation, was Hari Lal, a small-time laborer who had recently been dismissed from Kapoor's estate after a dispute over unpaid wages. Within days, he vanished without a trace. The murder case quickly grew cold. Political unrest in Punjab made it difficult to pursue leads, and the chaos of the late 1980s allowed many criminals to slip away unnoticed. Still, the name Hari Lal lingered in police records, a ghost attached to an unfinished story. The file gathered dust for decades in an old cabinet until India's modernization of crime archives began in the 2010s. During the digitization process, investigators uploaded fingerprints and scanned documents into a new national database. That's when a startling match appeared. The prints of a man named Harinder Singh, a long-term resident of Canada, matched those of the missing suspect. When Canadian authorities received the extradition request, they were skeptical at first. After all, Harinder was a senior citizen with no criminal record or history of violence. But the data didn't lie. Along with the fingerprints came fragments of the original investigation, an arrest warrant, old photographs, and a police sketch eerily resembling Harinder's younger face. It was enough to reopen the decades-old case. The quiet grocer from Surrey, admired by his neighbors, was suddenly at the center of an international murder investigation. When the story broke in local news outlets, Surrey was gripped by disbelief. Residents who had known Harinder Singh for decades could not accept what they were hearing. The man accused of being a fugitive murderer was, to them, the same person who offered free groceries to struggling families and donated winter blankets to the homeless. Outside his small grocery store, people gathered in silence, some leaving flowers, others shaking their heads in confusion. Community leaders called for compassion, insisting that there had to be a mistake. They organized petitions, collected signatures, and even reached out to local officials, urging them to intervene. But as journalists dug deeper, the details grew harder to dismiss. Court records obtained from federal archives revealed inconsistencies in Harinder's immigration file. His listed date of birth changed between documents. His birthplace was spelled differently in separate forms, and one record mentioned parents with names that did not match those on other papers. Immigration officers had overlooked these discrepancies decades earlier, but under modern scrutiny, they painted a troubling picture. Reporters began tracing Harinder's life before Canada. A few faint paper trails led back to Hong Kong in the early 1990s, where a man under a different name had boarded a flight bound for Vancouver using what was later confirmed to be a forged passport. Authorities discovered that the photo on that passport was an exact match to Harinder's. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community. People who had once defended him now found themselves questioning everything they knew. Was his kindness real, or had it been part of a carefully constructed disguise? Even those who continued to support him couldn't ignore the growing mountain of evidence. Surrey's beloved shopkeeper was now at the heart of a mystery that reached far beyond Canada's borders. As investigators pieced together Harinder Singh's hidden history, a far more complex story emerged. It turned out that the man known as Harinder had entered Canada in 1992 through a small refugee intake process in Vancouver. He had arrived with forged documents obtained in Hong Kong, claiming to be a victim of political persecution following violent unrest in Punjab. His papers included a refugee claim, a fabricated police report, and a baptism certificate, all perfectly aged and convincing. At the time, immigration authorities were overwhelmed by refugee applications, and Harinder's story appeared entirely credible. He was granted asylum and, years later, permanent residency. Through old immigration logs, officials discovered that he had initially registered under another name before applying for asylum under the name Harinder Singh. The brief time between those applications suggested he had been coached by someone familiar with the refugee process, possibly part of a network that specialized in creating new identities for those escaping criminal charges. The revelation transformed the case from an isolated fraud into something far bigger. When questioned, Harinder maintained his innocence, insisting that he was not the man from the Indian records. But forensic evidence continued to mount against him. Bank archives unearthed a 1989 transfer from an account in Amritsar linked to the stolen funds from the murder case. That money, investigators found, had been withdrawn in Hong Kong just months before Harinder entered Canada. As the walls closed in, Harinder's calm demeanor cracked. Neighbors who once saw him as gentle and patient now noticed he avoided eye contact and spoke little. Inside his home, officials found a small locked box containing faded letters, old photographs, and an Indian passport with a torn corner. bearing the name Hari Lal. It was the final piece connecting his past life to the man he had pretended to be for 33 years. The legal battle that followed became one of the most talked-about cases in both Canadian and Indian media. Harinder Singh's lawyers argued that deporting a 73-year-old man after more than 3 decades of peaceful life was not justice but cruelty. They emphasized his contribution to the community, his failing health, and his clean record in Canada. Supporters rallied outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Let him stay," and 33 years of honesty can't be erased by one mistake. The courtroom was filled with emotion as people from all backgrounds came to witness the trial of the man they had once called neighbor, mentor, and friend. The government, however, presented a different picture. Prosecutors argued that Harinder's life in Canada had been built on deception. They claimed he had entered the country under false pretenses, hiding from justice for a serious crime. Immigration officers testified that if his true identity had been known in 1992, he would never have been granted asylum. The evidence from India, a series of fingerprints, financial records, and photographs, painted a story that could no longer be ignored. As the case dragged on, new information surfaced. Investigators uncovered an old photograph stored in the archives of Amritsar police. It showed a group of men standing beside a small truck, believed to be the getaway vehicle used in the 1989 robbery. Among them was a man who looked unmistakably like a young Harinder. Forensic experts confirmed a strong resemblance, strengthening the case against him. With the mounting proof, public opinion began to shift. Sympathy turned to uncertainty. Even those who once defended him struggled to reconcile the kind shopkeeper they knew with the fugitive described in court. Harinder's lawyers appealed for compassion, but the truth had become too heavy to escape. Just days before his scheduled deportation, Harinder Singh's life came to a sudden and quiet end. On a cold January morning, neighbors noticed that the lights in his small house had been on all night. When no one saw him open his shop, they grew concerned and called the authorities. Police arrived to find him collapsed near his armchair, his breathing faint but steady. On the table beside him lay a sealed envelope addressed simply to the authorities. Despite being rushed to the hospital, Harinder never regained consciousness. He passed away that evening, leaving behind more questions than answers. When investigators opened the envelope, they discovered a handwritten confession in shaky, uneven letters. In it, Harinder admitted that he was, in fact, Hari Lal, the same man wanted for the 1989 Amritsar robbery and murder. He wrote that he never intended to kill Baldev Kapoor. The robbery, he claimed, had been orchestrated by his cousins to settle a family debt. He said the situation spiraled out of control when Kapoor resisted, and a struggle led to the fatal blow. Harinder fled in panic, fearing imprisonment and disgrace. He escaped through Nepal, then to Hong Kong, where he purchased forged documents and began a new life under a new name. The confession closed with an expression of remorse. He wrote that the years in Canada had changed him, that he had tried to atone through kindness and charity, but guilt had never left him. Authorities confirmed the letter's authenticity, officially linking him to the decades-old case. The Indian government closed the file, ending a 36-year pursuit. In Surrey, residents mourned quietly. Some remembered him as a criminal who deceived them, while others saw him as a man who spent half a lifetime seeking redemption. His story became a haunting reminder that even the gentlest faces can hide the deepest secrets.